Hello, friends of the IACL blog, and welcome to another interview in our series highlighting recently published books. I'm delighted to be joined today by Mariana Velasco-Rivera to discuss her new book, The Politics of Constitutional Rigidity, Unveiling Pathways to Change in Mexico, which was published by Oxford University Press in June this year. So welcome, Mariana, and
Hi,
congratulations.
Lizzie. Thank you for having me.
So Dr. Mariana Velasco Rivera is an assistant professor in the School of Law and Criminology at Maynooth University in Ireland. She holds JSD and LLM degrees from Yale Law School and a law degree from ETAM in Mexico. And prior to her graduate studies, she clerked for Judge Jose Ramon Cosía Diaz at the Supreme Court of Mexico. And she's also the outgoing co-editor of the IACL blog. And so in this new book, which I will show, but not very well. No, it's not working. Anyway, you can see it on the screen.
I can try. Hang on.
Mm,
So it's probably
yeah.
the,
Um,
no, why is it? Oh,
but in this book, Mariana seeks to explain why, despite a formally rigid constitutional amendment rule, in practice, the Mexican Constitution has been amended so many times. So, Mariana, to start off, can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to write this book?
sure, Lizzie. So I guess there are, just thinking about it, like there are perhaps two main reasons that sort of like made me think that it was important, at least for me to write this book about Mexico. And one thing is, so the first thing is the court-centric environment that, I guess like we all, but like in my, personal experience, I like sort of like was formed, like my legal, brain was formed, so to say. So so when I started this project, I had spent time as an exchange student in Colombia in Universidad de los Andes. And then I already had spent 1 year in the US doing my LLM. So, like it was kind of like being in Colombia and seeing, how powerful or important an important political role the Constitutional Court played there, and also seeing the importance that the U.S. Supreme Court play in the legal culture in the U.S. Matched in a way what I had experienced also or learned in the classroom, in the sense that, we all learn, even like when I was at university, like this, sort of like kind of like fade in courts, and like their power to, sort of like advance and even protect democratic values and democracy, um, kind of like this matched the legal cultures in these two countries. So they were, like we learned that, courts should be, when they are empowered with judicial review powers, like they should become, in democratic contexts, that should become important or powerful political actors. And at the same time, Mexico. So again, like, I studied my first law degree, like I got it in at ITAM in Mexico City. Mexico was following the blueprint of this, this, so to say, like recipe of, we are empowering the Supreme Court of Mexico was empowered with judicial review powers back in the 90s, again, like to make it like a true constitutional tribunal. But at the same time, like, that, Mexico was following that blueprint that was being followed all around the world. The constitution was being frequently amended. So in my mind, like that didn't make a lot of sense. So that was one thing, that, like something was missing to be able to explain the Mexican case. And then at the same time, also like through my, like, I guess like the my legal um eh, education, and also like my legal experience in Mexico, because I, um, after finishing my law degree, I also spent time in the Supreme Court on Mexico. So I also, learn, and also like, in Colombia and the US, like in the LLM, like you learn, or to assume or to have like certain normative assumptions about formal constitutional change, right? Like in terms of, how deliberative these processes should be, how transparent these processes should be, and how the rules at the design of, the amendment rules impact, the quality of those processes. So again, this was another like mismatch between like theory and practice in my lived experience in Mexico, in the sense that, this wasn't the case. From what I was observing, this wasn't the case in Mexico. What I was observing in Mexico was, that deliberation or true deliberation and transparency wasn't like they weren't present in amendment processes. And again, this was just about, someone seeing, or living the reality in a specific context, and just like seeing that, what I was learning in the classroom or what I had learned in the classroom was not matching reality in that particular case. So what I wanted was, to see how, like, try to figure out if what I was seeing in practice, what I had experienced in practice as, a person living in Mexico, growing up in Mexico, and seeing how the constitution change there was kind of like a pattern, right? Like if, in the newspapers, seeing always like amendment processes being described as, they are fast tracked, like they're there was no because they are fast tracked, there was no deliberation, like everything is done like, very quickly. So I wanted to see, to figure out if that was a pattern. So what I did, starting, my JSD was essentially to start mining the data that I needed to like looking at the times, like how long each, stage of the constitutional process took in reality, so that I could be able like to build a data set that then served me to analyze and understand the dynamics of formal constitutional change in Mexico. So that's the two, I guess, like the two things that influenced me
Yeah.
to write this book.
Yeah. It's interesting how we're always influenced by our our formative legal education, but how much that can be shaken once we start to look outside.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so
Yeah.
I guess that leads on to my next question. So you kind of had this conundrum, and the Mexican Constitution has just changed an enormous amount of times. It's like over 700, I think, since
Yeah, yeah,
um
yeah. Over 700, over
1970.
750. I lost count already.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Um, and so so you were finding out what was actually going on here. So what do you hope then to see as the book's main contribution, and who do you think will be
Yeah.
interested?
Um, so I think like that's also like a difficult question, in the sense that, yeah, it's so like when you start like projects like this, like, well, when I started like this project, I was just, uh, I wanted to understand it myself, but then obviously like you have to sort of like find the right, you have to find the body of work that is useful to for you to actually understand that, and then like figure out like what you are contributing to. So I guess like one thing that perhaps comes across in the book, but you can tell me if I'm if I'm mistaken. So one thing that I think that comes across in the book is that I so what I found like by review, like, like looking at the relevant literature, is that we like there are certain works that like, or we tend to sort of like ignore the specific actors that put in motion like certain institutions, in this case that put in motion the amendment process. So one, I hope that one contribution of my work would be like to shifting, to contribute to shifting the attention, or our attention, to the actors that put institutions in motion, and also as well like question some normative assumptions that we have about constitutional change, which at times I think like these assumptions have made our work more difficult, in the sense that, like, if a process of amendment is not matching what we believe should look like, we perhaps like more easily like are more ready to disregard that case as useful, as something that we can learn from, and disregard it like as something that is dysfunctional, and therefore like it's not, we should simply just not look at it because it's just so bad that there's not nothing to learn from it. um so I think questioning the assumptions that we have about these processes would be useful to be able to be open to better understand how institutions really work. um so yeah, so that's one thing. And the other thing, I think, sort of like a macro, like thinking about like a macro level contribution, hopefully, I see my work sitting kind of like next to the body of literature that has been investigating the role of courts in constitutional democracies. Um, so one of the things that I kept thinking about when I was working in the book was that one of the things that the wave of new constitutionalism brought to us, or like the court-centric sort of like um the court-centric environment where we like that was dominant in that has been dominant in the last like 20 years or so, is that we assume that in time one, when courts are empowered with judicial review powers, of course, like they will become important political actors, so long as the constitutional text remains relatively stable. So
Yeah.
what happens when that is not the case? And I think the Mexican case is it's a very interesting case to actually see what happens when that is not the case. So I think that's another, like like I am hopefully contributing to understand sort of like the longer term implications of a model that went that a model that, like, I think like it's correct when we have the different necessary elements for it to work, but we can see a longer term implications of that model when one of those elements is not present. So that's another hopefully another contribution of the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think it's really interesting because obviously, so my next question I wanted to ask you about is writing about Mexico, but for a
Yeah.
comparative audience. So I've read the book and before I read the book, knew nothing about Mexico. Now know a lot more
Mm,
about Mexico, but certainly there are things I can take from it. There's a framework that's developed to understand the informal parts of constitutional change. So the things
mm,
aside from the rules in the Constitution around political parties, choices they're making, and constitutional culture, how all those things flow in, as well as you say, the role of the courts here. Um,
mm,
so there's kind of, so it's two things. You're using Mexico to do that, but developing a framework and findings that I think are relevant for so many other jurisdictions. So I just wanted to ask you to if you've got any reflections at all on the benefits and challenges of the choice to write on a single country um,
mhm.
while speaking to a comparative audience.
Yeah. So for me, the choice of a single country was not that difficult,
Yeah.
in the sense that, the question that I was dealing with, I was hugely intrigued by. So I really want to, like, at an individual level, like I really wanted to answer the question for myself, even like I
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
so I really wanted to solve the puzzle that Mexico presents. Um, so in that way, the decision about like writing about Mexico was easy, so to say. But the challenge was kind of like to come to understand Mexico in the broader comparative picture and be able to bring the case to a broader conversation. I hope, like, I don't know if I managed to do it, but that was kind of like the challenge. Like, how do I make this case relevant for, broader conversations that we are having in comparative constitutional law, and make it appealing, to a broader audience other than, a Mexican audience. Eh, so again, I don't know if I managed it in the book, but I will. Yeah, and I guess we will find out how effective or not I was. But I think that another tricky part of, writing on a single country, not only on a single country, but a country like that, is from the global south, is perhaps that many people first impression would be that, there's nothing, or perhaps nothing much, to learn about from a country like Mexico, because, it comes from a group of countries that, and I'm gonna like quote this, like, that are fundamentally dysfunctional, or, it's so, why do a like fully developed country would want, or an economically developed country would want to see a country that, it's not kind of like at the same level, so to say. So in a way, what I try to do in the book, again, I don't know if I do it effectively, but what I try to do in the book is to resist this idea, in the sense that my assumption from the outset is that, look, like, we all, like, at a very high level, like, constitutional democracies share a lot of commonalities. So we, like, all constitutional democracies, are run by political actors that, by, definition, my assumption is, like, are self-interested, and they will try to use, the most effective means to entrench their agendas, for better or worse, like, or with good intention, or bad intentions, but, like, that's, the logic of, being in government, right? So and, that may go well or may go wrong, like, it may go well or wrong. And, the fact of having, frequent access to the constitutional amendment mechanism may have negative implications, as I also, like, lay out in the book. Like, I think in the Mexican case, it has, it clearly has, had negative implications in sort of like how constitutional democracy works there. But that doesn't mean, I don't think that doesn't mean it has to be it has to be like that. Like, it's not, if you frequently amend your constitution, this is your path, or this is your future. I don't think that, like, I don't want to convey that message in the book. It's just another constitutional experience. And even, the negative impact that these dynamics have had in Mexico, um, um, I think they are useful to learn from, if that makes sense. So in any case, like, I think that, yeah, so studying a country at, to a very, like, to a very detailed degree helps. It's a lot of work, but I think it helps to enrich the, the broader debates, or the broader questions that we are trying to answer at a, like, at a higher level, if that, yeah. So that's, I think, um um those are, like, the lessons that I can draw from, working on a single country. I'm sure there are more, but, like, yeah, those are the things that I can think of right now.
Yeah. No, I think that, I mean, for me, that really came through. This, like, very careful working through what is really a puzzle of
Yeah.
why we have this strictly formal like, hard to amend, strictly rigid, formally rigid constitution that in fact is not rigid. And, like, asking, like you say, going really deep, and you do go very deep and there's very careful work. It really helps
Yeah.
shed light on the other. Yeah, I think there's big lessons for all of us from that.
Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to say, sorry, Lizzie, to cut you, but the other thing, just like building on what you're just saying, is that it was in working on a single country is also like very difficult in the sense that like obviously like there are things that I'm gonna miss because when you go into so much detail, like also like there's so many things to take into account that perhaps like I also like I miss things. But like the objective of the book in a way was to give like sort of like the broader possible um a framework to also be able to sort of like be able to be useful to other places, if that makes sense. So again, like the account that I'm giving in this book, like I'm sure like I'm certain it's not perfect, and I'm certain that like it's missing like important aspects, but hopefully like that doesn't mean that the usefulness of the theoretical framework is less than.
Yeah, because I think it's both an account and an approach
Yeah,
to
exactly, exactly.
understanding.
Yeah,
So now I'm going to ask you the hard question, which I always
yeah.
ask people. And it's a hard question because the answer is surely many people, but whose work was especially influential for you in writing this particular book?
So again, yes, so it's a very hard question. And yes, the answer is many people. And I'm sure that I'm gonna miss people that were also important. But so I guess like thinking, sort of like from the beginning, uh, one book that was important to me to sort of like validate the sort of like the interest that I had and to sort of like push me into like going to actually pursue the JSE with this question was a book by it was an edited volume actually by Maria Amparo Casar and Ignacio Marvan, who are like two Mexican scholars. Ignacio Marvan passed away a few years ago, sadly. But yeah, so he's a historian. He was a Mexican historian, and Maria Amparo Casar, she's a political scientist. So they were like they had this edited volume with this like with a very like interdisciplinary group of people like trying to like dealing with different aspects of the phenomenon of amendment hyper reformism in Mexico. So that was kind of and it was published in 2013 or 2014. I'm like very soon before like very soon before I went to do my LLM. So that was kind of like, oh, so this is something, it was sort of like validating my what I was thinking about. So that was one thing. Obviously, the work of Jose Ramon Cosillo, like his story, like his works on the role of the court in Mexico's democracy, and then the work of Sandy Levinson and Vicky Jackson in the case of like how amendment difficulty is understood in the U.S. because also like the U.S. was kind of this very interesting case that it looks very it's the rule is very similar to the Mexican rule, but the constitutional experience is very different. Like as we know, the US Constitution is one of the least amended in the world, and the Mexican Constitution is one of the most. So learning from their work and how they understand a amendment difficulty in the US was also very helpful for me to for my own kind of like understanding of amendment difficulty, and also works, all this body of literature that deals with the role of courts in constitutional democracies, from, Rand Herschel, Tom Ginsburg, James Melton, Zachary Elkins, and also Ross Dixon. That was also like hugely important. So I was kind of like dealing with different bodies of literature, kind of like trying to, those are like the different bodies of literature that like helped me to kind of like position Mexico somewhere in between all of those. So yeah, those. I'm sure I'm missing some, like, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure I'm missing other works, but yeah, those
Yeah.
are.
No, it's always really interesting to hear, exactly that where people are sort of drawing from all sorts of different places as they're putting projects together.
Yeah.
So then one other question I had, and you've sort of mentioned challenges, but I also always ask this question. If you would wanted to reflect it all on the main challenges, what were the main challenges you faced when writing this book? Whatever type of
Yeah.
those might have been.
Yeah. So thinking about this question, so I couldn't help but like, reflecting on like the personal experience, like at the intersection of, the personal experience of the individual trying to, like bring forward an academic project, obviously. So since the book is kind of like in a way sitting um, awkwardly, I would say, sitting awkwardly at the intersection of, between law and political science, uh, in that, it deals with a question that both disciplines have engaged with. I think, a personal and methodological challenge was to overcome the the idea or not buying into the idea that because I'm not a political scientist, I was ill-equipped to make a meaningful contribution.
Yeah.
So more recently, so that like those voices kind of like, sort of like if I were a political scientist, I would like, I would actually be able to do this. But because I'm a law, like because I'm a legal scholar, I have no skills to do this. So to say like I'm being a bit dramatic, but like it's kind of like, um this yeah, this idea that it's kind of like floating in, the rooms where we are discussing about methodology in comparative constitutional law. So more recently, I have to say that it's been very refreshing to see questions of methods in comparative constitutional law reivindicated, in the work of different authors, including yours and like Ross Dixon and Aileen Kavanagh and Adrian Stone, among others. But that question like played like, weighted heavy on me at many like at different points in time during like while I was writing this. um and also like for example when I was also like building my data my data set. I had to learn to code and things like that yeah. Where I mean, but in the end, like it's just, I don't know. Yeah, it's about asking and being, like it's about being open to learn new things and also like acknowledging your limitations and like addressing them as well. But that was a challenge. And then on a personal level, I think it was, also it was a difficult time to write the book when I signed the contract with OUP. I had just started a new job and in Maynooth University. So when I signed the contract, I was extremely ambitious of how fast I was going to be able to finish, because again, like I was working, building on my JSD dissertation. So, like the bulk of, or I like in my mind was like the bulk of, or the most difficult part of the work was already, done. Um, but again, like when you go back and you have to revise and, you have to read I had to read Mariana of like, 3 years ago, or it was also, yeah, it took time. It was not like it's not that, I had to change I mean, I guess like the core of the project was there, and the core ideas were there, but there was a lot of work like kind of like polishing and trying to, yeah, to bring it to a level that I was happy with. Eh, yeah, I guess like I also made mistakes of, like simply perhaps like being too perfectionist and like just making it longer than it should have been. But it was a challenge because again, like I was starting a new job, I was coming into this like completely new, teaching and learning culture, completely new country. Like I've never been here before I started a job. Like, like it was a lot. I had a lot on my plate. So that was a huge challenge. So yeah,
Yeah,
those two things I'd
made
say.
it.
I may
And then so the last question I had, although I feel like we should take a moment to celebrate having finish the book. The next question I had was just if you could tell us what's sort of next on your horizon in terms of academic projects.
so that's also a difficult question because I feel that I haven't had the time to like kind of like sit still and like decide what will be the next project. But again, like publishing a book, I guess like it's such a long project, and there are so many different points in time where you can celebrate, and then when you're done, it's like, okay, so now I guess like, this is done. I have to kind of like move on. It's just difficult. It's just difficult to set, like the finish line when it comes to publishing a book. I think that it's what I'm trying to say. But anyway, so again, like in short, like I'm still like, thinking or starting to think about like the next kind of like big project, so to say. But I have a few ongoing projects and paths ahead that I'd like to follow through. So right now I'm working, like I have a work in progress with Joel Colon Rios on what we call the usurpation of constituent power. So again, like also related to, constitutional amendments. But what we are doing in this project is analyzing how actors in high offices, including courts in Mexico, Colombia, and Venezuela, use the vocabulary of constituent power to claim authority to introduce constitutional changes or to justify reviewing constitutional amendments or deciding not to review them in the case of courts. So we are working on that. And then another thing that I would like to delve into detail is the regulation of the internal life of political parties. To better understand, like, for example, to what extent courts intervene in these issues and how, this impacts or not the behavior of legislative bodies. And lastly, I guess like the big elephant in the room that will give me a lot to think about and work on this is the current implementation of the judicial overhaul in Mexico. So, like for those who don't know, the judicial overhaul essentially introduced the popular election of all federal and state judges in Mexico. So there's going to be a lot to think about in that regard. So I guess like those are the kind of like three themes that I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Mariana, for sharing your ideas and the
Thank
process
you.
with us. And thank you to everybody who is listening to or watching us. And if you've enjoyed the discussion and you're interested in getting a hold of the book, there's information about it linked on the blog. And as always, for more of the same, you can keep up with the blog by following us on Twitter, now known as X, or subscribing to our mailing list. And if you've recently published a book on constitutional law and would like to be featured in a book interview, get in contact with us via the blog contact form. Thanks so much, Mariana.
Thank you so much for having me.